Does the Wheel of the Year not totally resonate with you? My motto as the writing witch is magic is the power to write your own story. Well, part of having the power to write your own story is crafting your own beliefs, habits, rituals, and traditions that play to your strengths and speak to your truths. As the great Kellyanne Maddox once said, belief is a tool. And I believe that we each have our own unique ways of embracing or not embracing various tools and modalities. As non-conforming spiritualists, we don't have any overarching religion to tell us what to do and why. So it's up to each of us to explore and observe ideas that inspire us to see how they are or are not helpful to us. This darkening, enchanting, and mysterious time of year between November's Eve and the winter solstice is a great time, I believe anyway, to look within and learn to better understand what our beliefs are, how they're serving us, and how we can embrace them, or not embrace them, to aid in becoming our next best version of ourselves in the new year ahead. To chat about how to break the rules of seasonal living in a way that isn't necessarily confined to the box of the traditional 8 seasonal Sabbats, I've invited my friend Luchina Lyra to join me on this episode of the Alchemy of Affluence podcast. Luchina is a skeptical mystic and the creator behind the Possibility Department, a space where logic and spirit comfortably cross paths. She creates podcasts, workshops, programs, and courses with the goal of leading folks to their own unique personal practice, beyond the standards or systems of any one path. In this outside-the-box conversation about seasonal living, we're chatting about a totally alternative perspective on seasonal living for when the traditional Wheel of the Year isn't quite resonating, selecting and or crafting pagan holidays and seasonal checkpoints based on your own personal truth, embracing the solstices, and playing with the idea of the sun being our god from both a spiritual and scientific perspective. Harnessing the power of gratitude, resourcefulness, and acceptance, and reclaiming the magic of seasons or phases that used to trigger you. Manifesting over the course of a year using your own energy levels regardless of the traditional Sabbath system. Working with the concept of having a theme for each year and how that's more sustainable than the pop culture resolution traditions. Embracing other holidays and quote-unquote Sabbats outside of the 8 solstices, equinoxes, and cross quarters, such as Day of the Dead or your own birthday, for example. Working with the New Year checkpoints of various cultures, traditions, and modalities to make an entire season out of sustainably growing into a new version of yourself. Our musings about personal astrology and seasonal living, and a psycho-spiritual way of looking at tradition, ritual, and faith and magical concepts. We invite you to cozy up with something hot or cold to drink for this non-traditional approach to a fulfilling seasonal lifestyle. Welcome back, Luchina.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be back.
It has been a hot minute. And so for anyone listening, if you want to listen to our Get to Know You episode with Luchina, I'm going to link that with this one. But for our new series, we are just going to dive right in and talk about seasons and cycles. And interestingly, Luchina is not a big fan of the typical Wheel of the Year. So we're going to actually be talking about alternative perspectives on how to have a magical year, whether or not you resonate with the typical 8 Sabbats. So let's just dive right into it. Like, what are your reasons for not really loving the typical style? And like, what do you prefer for your Wheel of the Year experience?
I think part of well, first of all, I don't want to say that I dislike the Wheel of the Year necessarily. It's something that doesn't resonate with me personally because I did try it for a whole year. I did a Wheel of the Year series on my Patreon where, I looked up each Sabbat and what does it represent? And it didn't resonate with me for several really reasons, but all of those reasons kind of culminate into the same reason, which is it is kind of Eurocentric in its sort of seasonality. I live in Texas, and before this, I lived in the Southern Hemisphere. I lived in Brazil. And so this idea of, having a perfect 4 seasons, which some people do, and even some people in the US do, I've never really been able to experience that. And so many times when like looking into these Sabbats, it's like it's supposed to be snowing or it's supposed to be dark, or on this Sabbat you bake bread. It did not resonate with me. And then it also made me feel like I had to dive into this fantastical world where I wished that I lived somewhere else or that my reality was different. Or even a lot of the content that gets perpetuated around it, right? Like a lot of the people who are really super into Wheel of the Year are in Europe, you know what I mean? And so like even the photos and everything, it was just instead of, I feel like spirituality should be something that grounds you and makes you feel good in your truth. And instead, it was making me feel like my truth should be something else. And so, what I did was there are certain things that I sort of kept, and most of it I kind of let go of. Like, I still love the winter solstice, I still love the summer solstice, but I don't necessarily subscribe to a lot of the like traditional, you're supposed to bake this bread on this day, or say this prayer to this god. I'm also not Wiccan, so there's that too. And I know that not every practitioner of the Wheel of the Year is Wiccan, but there's some crossover there. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can, even though I can definitely relate to like the seasons making a little bit more sense because I live in New York, like when I got started, there were so many other aspects of it that did not make sense to me, which is kind of why I focus so much on like the sort of self-development aspect of it in my
Yeah.
because, just like you, I'm not Wiccan, I'm not particularly theistic in my paganism. And, if I was, it wouldn't necessarily be with the gods and goddesses that are typically ascribed to the Wheel of the Year. Some of them, but not really necessarily all of them all the time in that sort of,
Yeah.
stereotypical way. And another big thing for me was like, even though I can relate to the seasons in the North, I kind of felt kind of funky at the beginning around like the sort of ethnocentricity of the way the Wheel of the Year is often taught. And
Yeah.
after years of research and, kind of looking at it from several different angles, I have realized that the cross quarters really are more Celtic, which is why I think it kind of became such a thing that like the whole thing became Celtic. But like the
Mm-hmm.
solstices and equinoxes are something that all humans everywhere have kind of related to in some way or other, whether we have 25 different books on the shelf about it or not, you know.
Right.
So, yeah. So what do you like about the solstice, for example? Like how do you relate to it even without those typical Wiccan styles of going about it?
I think, yeah, definitely my two favorite like seasonal observations would be the summer solstice and the winter solstice. And what I love about the summer solstice is I like to take the time to really think of the sun as our god in a sense, even though I'm also really not theistic. But I like to use that day to think of, past civilizations and past peoples and their worship of the sun as God, and how today we might see that as something like, barbaric almost, because now we have science. Um, and science is wonderful, and I believe everything that science says. But however, I think it's an awfully poetic thing to think of the sun as our God, because in a way it is. The sun is a star, stars die, and one day the sun will die. And when the sun dies, we die with it. Um, we'll cause our own demise before that, I'm sure, but I'm positive of that. But it's to really kind of revere that everything on earth functions in this very delicate balance, the conditions of our life, the amount of sunlight that we're able to get that has this very delicate balance for crops to grow and for us to be fed and for us to have enough oxygen. Like it's all so um magical. It's all so, it's wild that we're here and we have this set of conditions and that we're alive. And the sun is kind of the center of all that. Without the sun, there's nothing. Um, and so I like to take that day and really reflect on that and put a bunch of sunscreen on and go sweat in the Texas heat and really like feel it, because that, I think, I used to hate summer. I used to absolutely hate summer because I think I really had that I don't know. I think I was entrenched in like the aesthetics of magic, right? And the aesthetics that are portrayed for magic are very Eurocentric in the sense that, it's usually a girl who like looks like a woodland fairy and lives somewhere in the UK and it's always snowing and it's dark and it's Edinburgh or like whatever. And so I think I never really associated the summer with being something like beautiful and expansive and magical, which is ridiculous because I'm Brazilian, right? Like that should be the first thing that feels magical to me. And so I think part of my reclamation of summer was really like letting myself be out in the sun and using like instead of seeing the sweating as like, oh my God, I'm sweating, I'm all sticky, this sucks, summer sucks, this is awful, seeing it as almost like a cleansing of sorts and using it as kind of like a ritual in itself. I'm really into like reclaiming where you already are and what is already true instead of like fighting against it, you know?
Yes, I love that so much. And yeah, that I've had that same experience because like here in New York, it can get horribly hot in the summer too, but it's humid. So
Ugh.
that humidity is just like the devil. But yeah, I have had to kind of have that experience, especially in times in the past when I didn't necessarily have the best like air conditioning and stuff like that. And I was kind of just like, oh man, this is a struggle. But I would really lean into gratitude.
Yeah.
As like even like in my 20s, imagine it's like a hot day and I'm like dragging groceries up the stairs into my hot apartment, and I'm like, oh, my life sucks. But then I would like put my groceries away, crack open something cold to drink, and then kind of realize like just because I had a hard time getting groceries up the stairs, imagine what our ancestors had to do to get like this variety of food in their fridge. You know what I
Right.
it so it kind of puts it in perspective, just like how good we have it, that for you to be toiling in the sun, it's because you stepped out of the air conditioning and went outside and put sunscreen on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I feel like that gratitude, when we look at the comparison between the way we live today, even when we are frustrated and when the circumstances are not perfect, versus what it took humanity to get to this place where we have these, amenities and where we're able to live in practically any climate just due to technology. It's pretty mind blowing.
It's a luxury. We live very luxuriously and we do not notice it enough.
Yeah, for sure. So you also have your own sort of wheel of the year that goes beyond the solstices, is that right?
I wouldn't say that well, not in like the traditional spokes, but I do have a way that I engage with the year that's kind of based on the seasons where I live and kind of my energy levels around those seasons. So you could call that kind of like, I guess, how I manifest with the wheel of the year. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes, exactly. Like I know some pagans don't even use the solstices or equinoxes at all, and they just use like their birthday or, some significant date in their life, and they kind of just plot them on a circular calendar, or not even necessarily circular, but I feel like everyone has their own system to it. So I'm just curious like what your system is and what the rhyme or reason is to it.
Yeah, so I found mine by over the past couple of years really kind of taking note and documenting how I feel in each season. As far as like my energy levels, how much energy I have, what I want to be working on. And it has sort of formed this circular system that works really well for me. And that is that in November, December, I'm usually kind of winding down from the year. I'm reflecting on the year, and I'll usually start to get little inspirations for the theme of the upcoming year because I always do themes of the year. It's something that I work with that I honestly love. It's taught me so many different lessons. And then I kind of reject the whole like New Year's culture and New Year's resolutions and all of that. I think for me, at least, it's not a sustainable way of like setting goals or anything. And so in January and February, I'm like making the vision boards for that theme of the year and really like crystallizing exactly what do I want to come out of this year. Um, and then March and April, I'm starting to do like all of the planning, getting all the planners out. What are the habits that I need to build to get this done? And then May, June, July, August, September, it's just go, 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 go. It's just like attacking whatever the goal is, but in a way that is so sustainable because I took those months to do all that preliminary work. Like I got super clear on exactly what I wanted to accomplish. And then I did, kind of like the planning around it and then the foundational actions before actually going into it. And then October, we start winding down, usually around like, because I love Day of the Dead so much, I usually want to have the bulk of things done by Day of the Dead. Um, but yeah,
That's
and
almost like your personal sort of, some people say Samhain is the witch's new year. Is Day of the Dead kind of like your witchy new year?
it's not necessarily my new year because that is kind of like that's kind of my point to be like, okay, Lucia, it's time to wind down. You know what I mean? Because I like to be in sort of a relaxed state by Day of the Dead because I love it so much. I don't want chaos everywhere all around my house because me and my husband build altars every year and it's like a whole thing. Um, so I wouldn't say it's my new year. I don't think I have like a definitive day that I've defined where like this is where I open the portal into the new year. It's more of like a 4 to 5 month, from November to February, November to March, somewhere in there, something clicks that says, okay, you have your theme, you've determined, what you're going to do. And now it feels like you're stepping into that new window. So I really just wait for my body to feel like it's ready to sort of hop into whatever that new energy is instead of December 31st to January 1st. And I still celebrate with like friends and stuff like that because it's fun. But I don't, I don't do resolutions or anything like that because it just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, funnily enough, I just wrote an article that was basically exactly what you were just saying. How like the new year doesn't need to be this one thing where like in modern culture, it's like, okay, you work hard and you play hard all December, and then come January 1st, you would better be all cleaned up and like eating healthy and going to the gym and waking up at 5 a.m., right? And
Just
it's
like that. Like,
yeah, there's no transition, which is totally unsustainable.
yeah,
So, yeah, for me, I feel like fall is kind of, especially late fall, is a time to start thinking about winding down. And then by the time it's solstice time, I'm like, okay, really sit down and not do anything, give yourself a little vacation. And then, yeah, like January, February is like sort of internally incubating what I'm going to expand and grow into and starting to create those habits and rituals, as
yeah.
opposed to feeling like I needed to know what every habit and ritual was going to be by January 1st. You know what I mean? So by the time it is the spring equinox, I feel like I've actually had plenty of time to like say goodbye to the old year, bring in the new year. And then I guess maybe it's around like, yeah, the astrological new year being the spring equinox for me. Like
Oh,
that's a big part of the new year for me. It starts around Samhain, it continues through the solstice, and then it kind of ends around the spring equinox. And it's like, all right, the year is in full swing now. Let's do it. you know?
yeah. You just kind of brought something up that I never thought about, which is that maybe that is kind of my line for the new year is that astrological. I'm also an Aries, so like Aries season is usually when things start picking up for me. Um, So yeah, maybe if I did have to pick a mark, it probably would be around spring. And I love the way you put that, sort of internally incubating, because that's exactly what it feels like in those January, February months is like I sort of have a vision, but I believe so firmly in like allowing a vision to flourish. You know what I mean? Instead of just like getting an idea and going for it, like really kind of let it crystallize in your mind so that you can actually come up with the steps of exactly how you're going to get there. And yeah, that's exactly what it feels like internally incubating. I resonate with that.
Okay, I have a great question for you.
Okay.
So I know that you kind of see yourself as like a skeptical-ish occultist, where it's like, yes, let's play with this thing, but let's not do it in the dogmatic way. And I love
Hmm.
that about you and your content. So, what are your thoughts on astrology? Because I feel like astrology is one of those things where those of us who are a little skeptical sometimes are like, I don't know. I don't want to be defined by this chart or whatever. But then other times we experience it in certain ways, like you said, with your birthday, being around Aries season and always feeling that boost. Like, how do you kind of toe the line with that? What does that look like for you?
I love astrology. I do, because I see astrology as a tool and a way of finding truth and expressing ourselves. If I get a chart reading or listen to like an astrology podcast and it feels like that has zero truth to me, then I just set it aside. It's fine. But more often than not, I'll consume content on, the latest eclipse or, the latest full moon on my favorite astrologer. And a lot of times I do find a lot of truth in it, and it is helpful. And, the tagline of my business is possibly placebos or possibly not, right? And so to me, whether or not what the astrologer is saying is actually happening and that is actually the influence of the planets doesn't matter, because I get so much value out of it. And I also feel like that the different astrological seasons work in the same way that a wheel of the year works, in the sense that, like, if you work with the astrological seasons as opposed to the wheel of the year, or with both, you kind of guarantee that you're going to like put your hands on every energy during the year, right? You know what I mean? Like during Aries season, you're going to work hard, and during Scorpio season, you're going to get all secretive and like do internal shadow work and all this stuff. Or during Taurus season, you're going to treat yourself to like good dinners and things like that. So I feel like we can use these things as templates and as opportunities to have fun, to express ourselves, to find growth. And so there are moments where I really do believe, like, yeah, those planets are interacting and it affects some sort of energy down here. And then sometimes I believe it's more of like a collective consciousness thing. Similar to chaos magic, there's these theories in chaos magic that once enough people believe something, it forms its own kind of entity in a sense. So, if we take like some popular goddess as an example, like the goddess Diana or something, just to pull an example, the theory would be that enough people have believed in the goddess Diana that it actually formed an energy like the goddess Diana that is this sort of collective consciousness thing. But she didn't necessarily exist until all of these people started believing in her. Similar to, what's the name of that famous Christian prayer? I know it in Portuguese. Our Father, our Heavenly Father, I
I was
think.
like, sorry, I can't help you. I don't come
Yeah.
from a Christian background.
I I know it in Portuguese, but not in English. I think in English it's called our Heavenly Father, but similar to
That's funny.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, in this theory, it would be that that prayer actually has a sort of godlike power, but it has that power because so many people over hundreds of years have used it, and so yeah, I hop between camps. I didn't answer your question.
That's okay. That is totally okay. Yeah, I have been on an astrology journey for the past year or so. Like I've always been familiar with it, but like in the past I was a lot more skeptical of it, to be honest. And in recent times I've just had so much more like perspective around it since I've learned more about my chart. Because back in the day, you would read your horoscope and it'd just be this stupid thing about your sun sign and how you're gonna meet a boy over coffee today if you go to the cafe and you're like, what is this shit?
Yeah, yeah.
I could not get into that. Like, I really could not. But over the years, once I've started like understanding it more and realizing we're more than just our sun sign, and a lot has to do with that cycle of the seasons, like you said, then it started to make so much sense. So, like, I'm actively studying it now, and I'm loving the concept of thinking of the zodiac year as just part of the wheel of the year,
Yeah.
because that just makes so much more sense than thinking, like, oh, okay, so if I have this as my sun sign, then like this is my fortune. You know what I mean? Like, it kind of, the context means so much.
Yeah.
Okay, I actually have a question about your chart if you're open to sharing.
I am. Go for it.
Okay, so ever since I've started studying this concept of the zodiac sort of pairing with the cycle of the seasons, I've learned this concept of personal seasons, which is where you look at your rising sign compared to like the natural zodiac year, which would start at Aries, right? So for example, my rising sign is Gemini.
Mm-hmm.
And so since Gemini on the natural wheel is a little bit later, like about 3 signs, I think, after Aries, I kind of experience seasons in kind of a natural way, but slightly delayed. And
Oh.
yeah, and so I was thinking of you when I was learning this because way back in the day when we did another podcast and we briefly talked about the Wheel of the Year, you mentioned that summer almost feels like a winter to you. And I recently learned that a lot of people who feel that way, it's because of their rising sign. So now I'm wondering where your rising sign is and if I'm like guessing correctly about you.
Okay, my rising is Scorpio.
Okay, I might need to actually look at a chart here. But yeah, while I'm looking for that, can you tell me just a little bit about like your experience with yeah, like learning about like your rising sign or like anything beyond the sort of like stereotypical sun sign astrology?
Yeah, I think that looking at the chart as a whole has given me a lot more depth because if you meet me in person in the real world, I do read very, very Aries. I This might surprise people, but I come off to people, well, maybe it won't. I come off to people as very angry.
I mean,
Very,
I don't think okay, my moon is in Aries, so I'm very partial to understanding that Aries are not all just angry. So I don't see you as angry. I just see you as very passionate.
okay, thank you. Thank you. Um, I mean, in people's defense, I think I do give off that vibe in public, but my forward facing kind of like facade is very Aries. Now, learning like the moon in Libra made a lot of sense to me because behind closed doors and my emotional self, I am someone who's always seeking so much balance and everything, which is so different from kind of my public facade, which is kind of like I'm so tough. Don't mess with me. Also, don't talk to me because I'm antisocial, you know? Um, and the Scorpio rising, I think that also kind of reads into my super interest in the occult. I had an astrologer message me once and tell me, I think she guessed my Mercury sign. She guessed that it was in Pisces because I just love talking about the occult so much. And apparently that is a big telltale sign of people who like talking about the occult or like pushing the limits of what humans are capable of as Mercury and Pisces. And also finding that I had more water in my chart than I expected. I think that was really validating and gave me permission to like really allow myself to unleash this part of myself that I felt like I had to keep under wraps, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I have experienced the same thing with water. Like, I didn't think I had any water in my chart because, you know, everyone just says, like, oh, listen to your sun, your moon, and your rising for zodiacs. You know, even good astrologers do that. And it's
Yeah.
pretty effective. But I actually looked at the rest of my chart and was like, okay, so I didn't think I had a lot of earth. I thought I was, you know, predominantly air and fire, like those masculine signs. Come to find out, I have a Capricorn stellium. So that's a lot
Wow.
of earth. And then
Yeah.
it's taking place in the eighth house, which is ruled by Scorpio. So apparently I have just, you know, a ton of feminine elements going on that I just wasn't even aware of. And yeah, it's just interesting. The more you learn about things, the more you can like learn about yourself. And like, would you say that's been validating for you to kind of experience like, oh, okay, there's a reason why I am the way I am, you know?
Oh, yeah. 100%. That's why I think that there are empowering ways to use categories like astrology or, you know, other popular ones that people love, like human design or what's that psychological one that's like INTJ or something, the Myers-Briggs, you know, which I think has been debunked now. But the point is that like I think that putting ourselves into boxes that we ourselves are kind of allowing ourselves to be in, that is something that can be empowering because it allows us to better understand ourselves. Where it becomes disempowering is when someone outside of us tries to put us in a box. You know what I mean? That's disempowering and that doesn't help us at all. But when we ourselves try to understand ourselves better by placing ourselves into these little slots, I think that that can be incredibly validating and can also add so much depth into understanding the multiplicity of who we are, you know? So that's why I say that like I love astrology as a tool. And sometimes I really do believe that it's 100% real. And then other times I'm like, it doesn't matter if it is or isn't. I'm getting so much out of it, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing about being like a curious and or magical person. It's that some of us really do like to do research and debunk things or like prove things or disprove things, but we also have the intuitive capability to understand whether or not a modality is helpful or harmful,
Yeah.
regardless of whether or not like this system matches up with this system. Like, for example, some, thought leaders will have some really awesome method. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally resonate with this. But then they'll say, like, oh, but astrology is complete and total bullshit. And I'm like, eh. I mean,
Yeah.
I see why you might want to say that, but I have personal experience that it isn't bullshit. You know what I mean? So there's that personal experience versus what we're being told. And I feel like we're always needing to be in some sort of balance with that.
Yeah. And I feel like anytime anyone in a spiritual sense is claiming that there's an absolute truth, just run the other way because no one can claim to know like the absolute truth, you know, and especially spiritually. Like the whole point of spirituality is that we have personal truth. So if someone's professing some method and saying that this is the method and it's better than every other method, run the other way.
Yes. And or if you're stubborn like me and you want to kind of take the parts that made sense before running away, just
Right.
in your backpack and then
And then run like Dora. Yeah.
yes. I could not find the document I was looking for to directly like tell me, but I'm going to try and look at a chart and see if I can figure it out. So your rising would be in Scorpio. And okay, so Scorpio, I'm trying to compare it to where like Aries would be. So yeah, yours, yeah, actually, with a Scorpio rising, your seasons, not that they're like reverse, but they're rotated basically like 50%. So yeah, according to this sort of seasonal astrology modality, your summer would kind of be your winter and your winter would kind of be your summer. Does that make sense? Or like am I just going crazy here? Does that resonate?
That's so interesting. I think it probably resonated. Well, when did I say that on our last interview, I said that summer was like my winter, right?
Yeah, and you kind of did describe it in the context of living in Texas and just not wanting to be outside, kind of like the way someone in a cold environment wouldn't want to be outside and that time of
Right.
year. But I was also thinking it might be astrological too, just because of how passionately you spoke about it. You know what I mean?
Well, I also feel like my perspective is flipped on that. Because I used to be that way where like during the summer I would shut myself up in the house and it was because I was in resistance to summer, I think. You know what I mean? And I was still in that place of like, oh, this sucks. I hate summer. Um and then in recent years I've really embraced the summer where it's like, no, it's hot, it's sweaty, I'm going to melt, but I'm going to go out there and melt anyways and I'm going to see this as part of a ritual that is embracing the seasons of where I live and seeing the beauty in it. You know, in July and June, there's thistles growing everywhere, which are beautiful. So I'm going to go pick the thistles and sweat my butt off. So I do think that that sort of inversion is where I was. And I don't feel like I'm so much there anymore because now I just feel like whatever is happening outside, I'm just going to ground into it and see the magic in it regardless, because this is the truth of where I am and it's beautiful and I'm going to find the beauty in it.
Yes, I love that. And honestly, I can relate to that even outside of like an astrological context because when I was a kid, I really loved winter because it was like around my birthday and I always kind of get that energetic boost. However, I do live in a climate where winter can be absolutely horrendous. And
Yeah.
especially once I became an adult and had to like take care of myself and had to like choose apartments that had good insulation, even though I didn't know how to do that. Yeah, terrible personal experience with that. But, I had a phase where I just had so much trauma around winter.
Yeah.
And I had to consciously decide to lean into the energies that did make sense. So, like for you, for example, you mentioned like that cleansing energy of kind of just letting the sun burn away, that past version of yourself. So, like for me, I would go outside in the cold and I would kind of let the cold air revitalize me in a way and kind of just
Oh.
change the perspective. So, and I think regardless of anyone's astrology or where we live, I think part of what's beautiful to me about living seasonally in any way, shape, or form is just looking around and saying, like, what's going on inside of me and how can what's going on outside kind of work together somehow, even if it seems counterintuitive. And I love that you do that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think the best way to start is to just start noticing what's going on around you and the nature around you and the seasons around you, and use that as a template to live your life cyclically in a way that feels good to you, that also resonates with your energy levels and how you feel, which is why one of the biggest tips that I always have for people is like, if you want to live seasonally, just spend a year taking notes on how you feel in each season. Do you feel energized in the winter? It doesn't matter if everyone else is tired in winter. If you're energized in winter, capitalize on that, like live your life according to you and how you interact with the seasons and how you interact with the world, not necessarily how some other tradition dictates.
I love that. And I think this is part of why I love your content because I don't know, maybe it's my Aries moon resonating with your Aries sun, but I love just like how passionately rebellious you can be sometimes about like, you know what, do you and screw the rules. Like, let's read it and understand the rules we're breaking, but we don't need to follow them. So, anyway, thank you for being your magical self. And I would love to give you the opportunity to tell our audience, like, what are you offering now and where can people find you and just get more of your magical goodness?
Yeah, so you can find me at the Possibility Department pretty much everywhere. I have a website, thepossibilitydepartment.com, where you can learn more about me. You can always find me and chat with me on Instagram. I'm always on there at the Possibility Department as well. And I also have a public podcast, which I'm going to start posting to again next year. It's also under the same name. And if you want to go that sort of next step with me, I am relaunching my Patreon on November 20th of this year, and that's called the Spirit Test Lab. And essentially, it's exactly what it sounds like. I offer meditations, courses, workshops, resources for skeptical mystics who want to explore magic in a way that allows you to engage with the belief fully or not. It just to get like the best and the most juice out of every single practice that you do for you and make it fit your life. So that's something that I'm relaunching as well.
That is so much fun. I love how just like custom it is. It's like learn this in whatever way makes sense for you. Because like honestly, what would spirituality be without customization? That's the world we're stepping away from. So thank you for helping us create this magical new world where we get to choose.
Oh my God, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. It's always so much fun to talk to you again.
Yes, I'll have to have you back again sometime.
Oh, sounds great.
So, magical mavens, what are your thoughts on crafting your own cyclical living lifestyle? Do the Wheel of the Year Sabbats resonate with you? Or, like me, is it some of both, where it kind of resonates, but I also kind of have to make it up as I go along? I would love to hear about your experience in the comments. One of my favorite ways to stay connected to the seasons without being obligated to do anything that doesn't resonate is to simply ask myself some simple yet powerful questions each season and discussing my responses with kindred spirits as my dreams take form. This is exactly what we're doing over in our growing Patreon community. There, I post customized reflection prompts for each of the new and full moons, as well as for the themes of each Sabbath on the Wheel of the Year. You get access to beautiful printable writing pages for your spiritual journal, grimoire, or book of shadows, and you get to join in the discussion with myself and other magical mavens as we each uniquely navigate the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle together. And I have exciting news for Cyber Week. Not only have I added monthly snail mail envelopes packed with grimoire goodies from my shop to almost every tier, but also new patrons who join or upgrade to any tier, excluding the Writing Witches tier, during Cyber Week will receive physical copies of my Wheel of the Year information/prompt pages. This page set isn't regularly included in any of the tiers, and I'm currently offering it in addition to everything normally included in each tier, along with some new things that I've added to each tier. If you're ready to start or simplify your magical practice while getting grounded in how to work with the seasons, moon phases, astrology, and divination in your own way so you can experience more fulfillment in your everyday life, this is the perfect time to join us. Just go to www.patreon.com/thewritingwitch. See you there.